The morning sun spread slowly over Santa Cruz, painting the modest streets in pale gold. Jack Miller was already awake, moving quietly in the small kitchen of his two-bedroom house. The place had seen better days, but it was home. The linoleum floor was scuffed, the cabinets a little chipped, yet there was a sense of care in every corner. Jack filled a mug with coffee, strong and black, and glanced toward the hallway where the sound of small footsteps echoed. Emily shuffled in, hair tangled from sleep, still wearing the pajamas with tiny wails she insisted on keeping even though the sleeves were too short. She was 8 years old, all curiosity and questions. And the reason Jack kept pushing forward, he had once been part of something bigger. Years in the Navy had shaped him into a man of precision and resilience. Now, his days were simpler. He spent hours bent under car hoods at the worn-out garage on the edge of town, grease staining his hands and shirt. The customers who came in saw him as a dependable mechanic, someone who fixed engines and refused to overcharge. Few knew about the small wooden box he kept tucked away on a high shelf in the garage. Inside were his military medals and a faded photograph of his wife. Gone too soon from heart failure. He never opened the box without feeling the weight of both pride and pain. Life was far from easy, but there was warmth in it. Emily's laughter filled the silence that loss had left behind. She followed him around the garage, asking endless questions about wrenches and spark plugs, or dragging him out to the beach on weekends to collect shells. She was a reminder that family could still exist even after tragedy, and that love did not vanish just because someone was gone. On the other side of California, another life unfolded with no trace of grease or sand. Victoria Hayes stood at the top of a glass tower in San Francisco, 35 years old and already known as one of the most powerful CEOs in the medical industry. The boardroom stretched around her, filled with suits, screens, and polished wood that smelled faintly of money and authority. Her tailored navy blazer fit like armor. Every word she spoke carried weight. Every decision shifted markets. Yet power had a cost. Victoria was surrounded by people who nodded when she talked, but never truly saw her. The betrayal she had endured years earlier, when the man she trusted chose her fortune over her heart, had left a scar too deep to heal. Success became her shield, and loneliness her shadow. Nights ended in a penthouse filled with silence, the city lights sparkling through glass but never warming the cold inside her chest. Jack's world was one of grit and quiet strength, built on love and survival. Victoria's world was steel and glass, fueled by ambition but haunted by isolation. He carried the smell of oil and ocean air, she the polished scent of perfume and boardrooms, two lives moving in opposite directions, unaware that fate was already arranging the moment when they would collide, changing both forever. The Saturday started calm, the kind of morning that made Jack grateful for Santa Cruz. The air was cool but warming fast, the waves steady, and the sand still damp from the night tide. Jack carried a faded blue cooler while Emily ran ahead, clutching a bucket and shovel. She shouted over her shoulder about finding the biggest shell of the day. He smiled, letting her enthusiasm set the pace. They found a spot close to the water, far enough to avoid the tide, but close enough for Emily to dart back and forth without worry. Jack spread out their old blanket, the one his late wife had bought on a family trip. Its colors faded but comforting. Emily got to work shaping the base of a castle, her small hands scooping and patting sand with focus. Jack knelt beside her, showing her how to pack the walls tighter, how to dig a moat that might hold water for a few minutes before sinking back into the beach. He corrected gently, laughing when the tower collapsed, praising her when it stood, to anyone passing by. It looked like a simple scene of a father and daughter at the beach. But for Jack, it was everything. His protective eyes scanned the waves in the crowd out of habit. Years in the Navy had trained him to stay alert, and fatherhood had only sharpened that instinct. A short distance away, a woman sat alone. She wore a light blouse and dark sunglasses, but the thick binder in her lap was hard to miss. Victoria Hayes had chosen this stretch of sand because it was quieter than the tourist spots, yet even here she carried her work. She turned pages while scribbling notes, ignoring the sound of children's laughter and the smell of salt in the air. She was present, but not truly there, a figure surrounded by sun and sea, but wrapped in isolation. The quiet broke in an instant. Jack heard a sound that froze him before he even turned his head. A strangled gasp, sharp and uneven. He looked up to see the woman's papers spilling into the sand as her body folded forward. Her hand clutched her chest, her lips tinged blue. Without a thought, Jack was on his feet and running. Emily called after him, confused, but stopped when she saw the woman on the ground. Jack dropped to his knees beside her, already assessing, breathing shallow, pulse weak, not panic, not heat exhaustion. This was cardiac distress. He turned sharply to Emily and told her to grab his phone and call 911. The fear on her face was real, but her voice stayed steady as she repeated the address he had drilled into her, describing the emergency with precision that no 8-year-old should have to know. Jack pressed his hands to the woman's chest and began compressions. He counted under his breath, focusing on rhythm. Her eyes fluttered closed, then opened again, locking on his face for a moment before rolling back. He refused to let her go. He bent to give a breath, then returned to compressions, whispering in a rough voice that carried both command and plea. "Stay with me. Not today." Minutes stretched. The sound of waves blurred with the sound of his effort, each push against her chest a battle. Then something shifted. Her eyes opened again, wide and startlingly blue, fixing on him with sudden clarity. For a heartbeat, he felt his own chest tighten, as if something inside him that had been asleep was waking. The paramedics arrived, voices sharp, equipment flashing in the sunlight. Jack gave a quick rundown, never breaking contact until hands and gloves replaced his. One of the medics glanced at him and nodded with respect. "You kept her stable. Good work." As they lifted her onto the stretcher, the woman's hand reached out. Her grip was weak, but determined, her lips barely moving as she whispered 2 words that landed heavier than he expected. "Thank you." Jack stood with Emily as the ambulance pulled away, sand still sticking to his knees, heart still racing. He knew nothing about the woman whose life he had just saved, yet the look in her eyes lingered, leaving behind a question he could not ignore. Late afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows of Jack's garage as he leaned over the open hood of a pickup. The day had been long, and his hands were black with grease. He was tightening a stubborn bolt when Emily's voice carried in from outside, high with excitement. "Dad, she's here." Jack straightened, confused, wiping his hands on a rag. He stepped toward the doorway just as Emily ran in, dragging someone behind her. There she was, the woman from the beach, standing in his shop, dressed in jeans and a simple white blouse, looking far different from the fragile figure he had kept alive on the sand. She smiled, steadying Emily's bouncing energy, and extended a hand. She called herself Rachel Collins, saying she worked freelance and lived not far from town. Jack's brow furrowed slightly. He hadn't expected to ever see her again, and he certainly hadn't expected her to come here. Rachel insisted she wanted to thank him properly. She said the hospital visit hadn't felt enough, and she owed him and Emily more than words. Her suggestion was dinner, her treat. Jack felt a tug of discomfort. Accepting favors was not in his nature, and the thought of sitting across a restaurant table from a near stranger left him uneasy. But Emily's wide-eyed excitement softened him. She tugged at his sleeve, pleading for them to go. He relented with a sigh, telling himself it was just one meal. That evening, they met at a small Italian restaurant downtown. The red-checked tablecloths and warm smell of garlic bread filled the air. To Jack's surprise, Rachel fit easily into their rhythm. She asked Emily about school, about her favorite books, about the seashells she collected. She listened with genuine attention, laughing at Emily's jokes, treating her words with a respect adults often forgot to give children. Emily glowed under the attention, and Jack found himself watching the two of them more than he watched his food. When the conversation turned to him, Rachel surprised him again. She asked about engines, about how long it took to rebuild one, about the kind of patience it required. Her questions weren't surface level. They carried a thoughtfulness that made Jack look at her with quiet suspicion. Most people's eyes glazed over when he spoke about his work, but she seemed to understand. He wondered where she had picked up that knowledge, but she offered little explanation beyond a casual interest. Still, small details gnawed at him. Her hands, soft and uncalloused, didn't match the life of someone who claimed to work hands-on. Her simple outfit, though plain at first glance, carried a quality that wasn't cheap. Twice during the meal, her phone buzzed insistently. She silenced it without answering, her smile flickering for a second before settling back into calm. Jack caught it each time, tucking away the unease but saying nothing. As they walked out into the night, Emily holding Rachel's hand as if it had always been natural, Jack felt something stir inside him. There was no denying the warmth Rachel brought into his daughter's world. Yet beneath it all, he sensed currents he could not see, secrets pressing against the surface. He told himself to be cautious, but his guard had already slipped more than he realized. Rachel began showing up at Jack's garage more often, always with some small problem that needed fixing. A strange noise under the hood, a light on the dashboard, a rattle she swore wasn't there before. Jack quickly realized most of these issues were nothing at all. Her car ran smoother than most that came through his shop, yet he let her stay. He watched her sit with Emily on an overturned milk crate, laughing as the little girl rattled off facts about seashells and dolphins. Sometimes Rachel arrived with a book tucked under her arm, always about the ocean. Emily's eyes lit up as she flipped through the pictures, her voice full of wonder. It became a pattern. By the time the week wound down, Jack found himself expecting to see Rachel's car in the driveway. Friday nights turned into pizza dinners. The three of them gathered around the small kitchen table. Emily chattered while Rachel listened, leaning in, encouraging every word. Jack sat back some evenings, watching them, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. The air in the house seemed lighter, as though Emily's laughter carried further when Rachel was there. Rachel helped Emily with homework, spreading papers across the table while Jack washed dishes. Her patience surprised him. She explained math problems slowly, letting Emily discover the answers instead of handing them over. On weekends, they sometimes walked the beach together. Emily collected shells while Rachel carried the bucket, bending down to listen to every excited discovery. The picture they made was almost too natural, like a family that had always been meant to fit together. Still, Jack's guard never fully dropped. He noticed things, small but persistent. Rachel's voice, polished and careful, carried the cadence of someone used to being in control. Her casual outfits looked simple, but the fabric and stitching were the kind he knew cost money. Once, when her phone rang, her entire expression shifted. She stepped outside, her tone clipped and formal. When she returned, she brushed it off as work, but something about the weight in her eyes stayed with him. Jack told himself he was reading too much into it. Maybe she was just private. Maybe everyone carried pieces of themselves they didn't want to show. Yet, the unease lingered. At night, after Emily went to bed, Jack would sit at the table, staring at the stack of ocean books Rachel had brought, wondering why someone like her would keep showing up at their door. And yet, when he thought about the way Emily's face glowed whenever Rachel walked in, or the way Rachel looked at Emily with genuine affection, He felt a pull he couldn't ignore. His instincts warned him that she carried secrets. But his heart, still healing from years of loss, told him that letting her in might be worth the risk. It was late evening when Jack wiped his hands on a rag and switched on the small television propped in the corner of the garage. The news anchor's voice carried the usual market updates, but one name caught his attention. Victoria Hayes, CEO of Hayes Medical, was addressing shareholders about a new line of cardiac technology. Jack froze, the rag slipping from his fingers. The screen showed a woman in a sharp navy suit, standing behind a podium with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention. Her hair was styled differently, her expression more severe, but her eyes were unmistakable. The same stormy blue that had stared up at him from the sand on the day she nearly died. Jack's chest tightened. Every Friday night dinner, every book she had brought for Emily, every laugh they had shared, all of it suddenly shifted in his mind. It wasn't Rachel Collins, the struggling freelancer. It was Victoria Hayes, billionaire and public figure, weaving herself into his daughter's life under a lie. He turned off the TV, the garage falling silent except for the pounding of his own pulse. The next afternoon he drove to the small apartment she had given as her address. The building was modest, but the moment she opened the door, he knew. He held up the folded newspaper with her photo on the front page. She looked at it, then at him, and her face went through a dozen emotions before settling into quiet defeat. She didn't even try to deny it. Inside, Jack's anger burned hot. He demanded answers, his voice raw. He asked what kind of game she thought she was playing, inserting herself into Emily's life with a name that wasn't hers. He said he had let her into their home, into their fragile family, and all along she had been lying. Victoria sat on the edge of the couch, no longer the polished executive from the screen, but not the warm Rachel he had thought he knew either. She admitted the truth. She said she had wanted to disappear from the world that only saw her as a fortune. She said that when he saved her, he didn't know who she was, and for the first time in years, she felt seen as a person instead of a symbol. She told him her feelings for him and for Emily were real, that none of that had been a lie. But Jack's face stayed hard. He told her that trust was not something she could bend to her will. He said his daughter had already lost one mother, and he would not let her lose another to deceit. His voice broke when he said Emily needed stability, not another heartbreak. When Jack told her to leave, Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She begged for a chance to explain to Emily, but Jack shook his head. He said Emily didn't need to know about billion-dollar secrets or public personas. What she needed was truth, and Rachel Collins was never real. He opened the door and stood waiting until she finally walked out. That night, Emily asked why Rachel hadn't come by. Her small voice carried confusion that cut deeper than Jack's anger. She asked if they had done something wrong, if Rachel was mad at them. Jack knelt beside her, unable to explain the betrayal in words she would understand. He told her sometimes people had to leave, even if they cared about you. After she went to bed, Jack sat in the quiet house, his fists clenched on the table. The anger still burned, but beneath it was grief, heavy and familiar. Outside, Victoria sat in her car, staring at the lights of the modest home she had almost become part of, tears slipping down her face. For both of them. The fragile bond that had been built was shattered, and neither knew if it could ever be repaired. A gray morning found Jack unlocking the garage when he noticed an envelope slid under the door. His name was written in careful handwriting he recognized instantly. He hesitated before picking it up, his chest tightening. Inside was a letter and a stack of legal documents. The letter was from Victoria. though she had signed it with her real name this time. She wrote that she knew he did not want to see her, but she could not leave without making something right. The documents outlined the creation of the Jennifer Miller Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding CPR training and emergency medical equipment for communities that could not afford it. She wrote that it was in honor of his late wife, who had inspired both his daughter and himself to keep living with courage. Jack sat at his workbench staring at the papers. It felt like both a gift and an intrusion. His wife's name written across the top stirred pride, but also anger. He did not know if he could accept such a gesture from the woman who had lied to him. That night, Emily noticed the papers on the table and asked about them. Jack explained as best he could, expecting her to be confused. But Emily thought for a moment, then said softly that the things Rachel had taught her about shells and the ocean were still real. Even if her name wasn't, her words landed heavier than she knew. A few days later, Jack dialed the number Victoria had left. His voice was steady as he said he would meet her to discuss the foundation. When they sat down at a quiet coffee shop, the air between them was thick with unspoken feelings. She looked different, less polished than the woman on the news, more like herself. Their conversation was professional, focused on the foundation, but every glance carried weight. She admitted her mistakes, without excuses. He set clear boundaries. If they were to work together, there could be no more lies. Over the following months, the foundation became their bridge. Jack offered practical knowledge, shaping programs that could truly help small towns and schools. Victoria used her influence and resources to secure funding and connections. Together, they built something that began saving lives almost immediately. Their work took them into gymnasiums, firehouses, and classrooms, places where Jack felt at home and Victoria learned to feel grounded. Emily's joy at seeing Victoria again was immediate and pure. When Jack explained the truth to her in simple terms, she accepted it with a nod. She still asked if Victoria could help her with science projects, because she was good at explaining hard things. That innocence softened Jack's resistance more than any apology could. Slowly, he noticed his anger giving way to something else. By the time the first community training event launched, Jack found himself watching Victoria from across the room. She knelt beside a group of children, showing them how to place their hands for compressions, her hair falling loose as she laughed at their efforts. In that moment, Jack saw not the CEO or the stranger who had lied, but the woman who had fought to become part of their lives in a way that mattered. Hope began to rise in him, fragile but real. He realized that redemption did not erase the past, but it could reshape the future. As he packed up equipment that evening, Emily tugged at his arm and whispered that maybe Rachel had never been fake after all. Maybe she was just Victoria learning how to be herself. Jack looked at Victoria then, and for the first time since the betrayal, he allowed himself to believe she might truly belong with them. A year later, the same stretch of sand where life had shifted forever was now dressed for a wedding. The sun was soft in the sky, the ocean steady behind them, its rhythm a reminder of how time moved on. Jack stood barefoot in the sand, a simple linen shirt and calm strength carrying him through the moment. His eyes moved across the gathering of close friends, neighbors, and family who had supported him through loss and into this new chapter. But when his gaze found Victoria walking toward him, everything else faded. Emily walked proudly ahead of her, carrying the rings in a small shell-shaped box she had chosen herself. She grinned at her father, her excitement impossible to contain. To her, this was not just a wedding. It was proof that the family she had dreamed about was real, now. She slipped the rings into Jack's hands with the care of someone who knew how much they meant. The ceremony was simple, without extravagance or spectacle. There were no lavish decorations or grand gestures, just the ocean breeze, the sound of gulls, and words spoken with sincerity. Jack felt the weight of the past pressing gently on him, not as pain, but as presence. He could almost feel Jennifer beside him, her spirit a quiet blessing. The promise he had once made to her about not letting grief consume him was fulfilled in this moment. Victoria's smile carried a kind of joy he had never seen in her during their earliest days. She no longer looked like the woman who hid behind false names or corporate armor. She looked like someone who had finally found where she belonged, not because of her fortune, but because she was loved for who she truly was. When they exchanged vows, Jack's voice was steady, but filled with emotion. He promised to protect this family, not with walls of fear, but with trust and hope. Victoria promised to walk beside him, not as the powerful CEO the world expected, but as a wife and a mother. As they kissed, Emily cheered, declaring them married with a child's authority that made everyone laugh through tears. The waves rolled in behind them, endless and sure, carrying the story forward. For Jack, it was no longer about loss, but about the life built after. For Victoria, it was about love that saw beyond her name. For Emily, it was about the family she always knew she deserved. Together, they stepped into the future, the ocean keeping rhythm with their new beginning.